The Chronicles of Uzaya, a novel by Robert Ray. This audiobook is narrated by Silas Grimm, an AI voice built from scratch. No human voice was used in the recording of this audio. Chapter 16. The Breach. Uzaya returned to Hearth End Lodge before nightfall. That night, his sleep was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass, the room dark around him. The sound came from directly below. He sat upright, hand already reaching for null tone on the nightstand. Another crash, followed by wood splintering, something heavy collapsing. Screaming, multiple voices. He pulled on his boots and moved for the door. The stairwell was chaos. A woman stumbled into his path, clutching her arm. Blood seeped between her fingers. Her eyes were wide, unfocused. Shock had gutted her awareness. She didn't even see him as he passed, one hand sliding along the wall, leaving red streaks behind. Shadows cast by moving forms below flickered up the stairwell walls. The stench hit him before he reached the bottom. Rot, death, decay. The common room was a slaughterhouse. 3 figures shambled between the overturned tables, wearing little more than tatters, dirt caked onto what remained of them. Their skin hung slack, gray-green in the lamplight. Their eyes were clouded over, whites marred by slow-turning spirals of deep violet and black, crawling across the surface. One crouched close to the fire, half hidden behind a fallen table, tearing into a body on the floor. A man's chest had been crushed inward, ribs driven through muscle and cloth. Blood spread thick and dark across the stone. The creature worked clumsily, broken fingers digging and pulling, unfazed by the shouts, the crashes, the scramble of the living around it. By the front door, a man swung his club at another of them. The blow landed with a wet crack. The husk barely registered it. Behind the bar, Nara raised her crossbow. Her hands were steady. She fired. The bolt punched through a zombie's throat. It staggered, but didn't fall. Uzaya stood at the edge, closed his eyes, and the chaos fell away. Something gathered in his throat, deep and instinctive, older than words. He let it break free as a sharp, percussive tone. The air convulsed. An invisible force slammed into the nearest one, hurling it across the room. It crashed into the wall, hard enough to crack timber. The spiral taken form by the hearth turned toward him, mouth slack, hypnotic patterns drifting slowly across the surface of its eyes. Uzaya drew null tone and was upon it in seconds. He struck. The blade passed through. The thing convulsed as the blow detonated, hurling it backward. It did not rise. Silence fell, except for ragged breathing and the slow drip of blood on the floorboards. Nara lowered her crossbow. "Cellar," Nara said, pointing toward an open door by the kitchen entrance. "They came from there." Uzaya looked. The door hung open, splintered outward from the inside. Cold air spilled through, the stench thickening toward the doorway. "That door's been locked for 15 years, Nara said quietly, "since I bought this place." Borum leaned against the bar, leather armor dark with blood, breathing hard. Blisters had formed along his arm, where the dead had clawed, red and weeping. His cough was wet. "Front door's clear," he rasped, wiping his mouth. Callista, Nara's daughter, sat on the floor near the kitchen door, clutching her neck. The bite had already darkened, skin swollen and glossy. Nara crossed to them both, already moving. One look was enough. "It's in the blood," she said. "Both of you." Borum coughed again, wet and ugly. Poison? Close enough. Nara tore cloth from a fallen sleeve and bound Borum's arm, tight and efficient. She crossed to Callista and did the same at her neck. Too tight. She adjusted it without comment, her hands steady, her eyes fixed anywhere but her daughter's face. "Take them," she said. Someone hesitated. "Where?" "The Celestial Heart," Nara replied. "Now." She turned back to Borum. "Get a wagon ready. I'll take care of the cellar," Uzaya said. "Whatever's down there." The cellar smelled of wet earth, sour and long-sealed. Darkness pressed close. Uzaya drew his glowstone, pale blue-white light spilling across the space. Barrels and crates emerged from shadow. Merchant stamps marked some. Eldenport vintners, southern grain suppliers. Ordinary storage, unremarkable. Until he reached the far wall. A broken shelving unit lay scattered across the floor. Behind it was an opening where solid stone should have been. The concealed door set into the wall had been torn from its hinges, splintered inward, its destruction dragging loose masonry and mortar down into the cellar. Cold air rolled out of the gap. Uzaya stepped through. Timber supports braced a crude passage, hacked through earth and stone with more determination than skill. The cuts were rough, the beams crooked, gaps already opening where soil had begun to slump inward. Roots dangled through cracks in the makeshift ceiling, water seeping down in thin streams, pooling across the muddy floor. Uzaya slowed, testing each step. 60 feet in, the character of the passage changed completely. The rough-cut tunnel ended in a hard, deliberate break, stone giving way to worked space. The wall looming ahead was not carved to follow the earth. He stood in a natural chamber. Ahead rose a wall of black stone, seamless and precise, its edges too straight for any hand. At its base, an archway, open. Certainly not built by the hands of whomever dug the tunnel. Blackstone, Veilguard architecture thousands of years old, here beneath the district long before Hearth End Lodge existed. The tunnel builders had broken into it by accident or intent. Either way, they'd found something they shouldn't have. Uzaya stepped through the arch. Stairs descended into darkness. He followed them down, letting the glowstone lead the way, one hand trailing along the smooth, glossy wall. 20 steps, maybe more. The air grew colder. The stairs opened into the sanctum's heart, octagonal. The ceiling was faceted rather than curved, planes of black stone meeting at hard angles above him. A stone basin and raised bench occupied the center. Concentric circles cut the floor, radiating outward. Uzaya moved inwards, listening. Nothing answered him. He crossed to the far archway, null-tone cool in his hand. The next chamber bore signs of occupation. Cot frames stood against one wall. A footlocker, a low dresser, a hook driven into the stone and left there. Smoke stained the ceiling in a shallow band, the trace of countless fires kept small and controlled. The walls belonged to a far older order, Blackstone, carved with priestly figures, hands raised in supplication, eyes closed, praising something beyond the frame. At the far end of the chamber, Uzaya found a skeleton slumped against the wall. Leather armor still clung to the bones, stiff with age. On the vest, a sigil, an angular mark like a hooked spear, stitched in faded red thread. Iron Jacks. He'd heard the name in passing. They were notorious smugglers, vanished from the quarter years back. The first of the undead stood in the very next chamber, in the center of the room, unmoving. head canted slightly to one side, as if listening to something beneath the stone. The leather vest it wore was the same as the one he'd seen before. At the chest, the familiar sigil. A blade hung from its hand, dull and corroded, the grip clenched tight. Waiting. Uzaya stopped. There were more. He circled wide, keeping to the wall, silent as mist. In the chamber beyond, two shapes waited. One crouched on the stone floor, scraping at the darkened surface with broken nails, its breathing raspy and uneven. The other stood near a doorway, swaying slowly. Uzaya drew a breath and released it as a sharp, guttural pulse. The air rippled. The standing one in the first chamber hurled backward into the wall with a crack. The one by the doorway collapsed where it stood. The crouched thing convulsed, clawing at its own skull, but kept moving. Uzaya was upon it. Null tone passed through. Whatever held the body together let go. Its spine gave way, and it folded to the floor without sound. The passage opened into a space unlike the one before it. Shallow channels had been cut into the floors, converging toward central drains. Each wall bore a single vertical indentation, form-fitted to the human frame, worn smooth at shoulder and hip where bodies had rested. Iron rings had been set directly into the walls at measured heights, their anchors fused into the stone. Each area included narrow recesses where objects or tools had been placed. The only exit was a wide ramp sloping downward. Uzaya followed it to an abrupt end. A massive block of blackstone had sheared free and settled across the passage, filling it wall to wall. Fine dust lay undisturbed across the fallen face. There was no way past it. Dawn light touched the common room's windows as Uzaya emerged from the cellar. Nara had already organized cleanup. Bodies dragged outside and covered, blood scrubbed from the floorboards with lye water, broken furniture stacked for repair or burning. She looked up, wiping her hands on a rag. Well? There's a tunnel cut beneath the cellar, he said. Not natural. Someone dug into something that was already there. She frowned. Something? He nodded. Stone rooms. Old. She was quiet for a moment. I didn't know. Her grip tightened on the rag. Is it still a problem? I took care of the dead, he said. Nothing's down there now. Nara let out a breath. Then her expression darkened. What was down there? The Iron Jacks, Uzaya said. Or used to be. Found their sigil on a vest. Her face went still. They owned this place. Years back, before I did. You bought it from them? She nodded once. He didn't mention tunnels. They used the cellar to reach the storage below, Uzaya said. Hide things. Keep out of sight. How are Borum and Callista? Left a while ago, Nara said, unable to meet his gaze. Should be at the church by now. She studied him, arms folding. The room's yours, she said, as long as you need. No charge. Thanks. He turned to leave, then paused. Seal the cellar. Properly. I'd rather not be wrong. By mid-morning, the district was already buzzing. Someone passing the lodge had seen a body laid out front beneath a tarp. Another claimed the keeper's daughter had been lifted into a wagon, pale and gravely injured. The inn was closed. Speculation wasn't. Something bad had happened at Hearth End. That much everyone agreed on. The rest of the story depended on who was telling it. The pale drow had gone into the cellar alone, had slain the rest of the undead beneath the inn, alone. Rumors of the incident spread quickly throughout the districts, swelling as they traveled. By the time the story reached beyond Hearth End, it had grown sharper, darker, more certain in the telling. The deeds of the pale drow reached many ears. Shortly past noon, a messenger arrived at the lodge. He wore green robes trimmed in silver, the antler insignia of the Order of the Celestial Heart stitched prominently at his shoulder. Young, perhaps 20, he carried the practiced solemnity of a newly ordained acolyte. After a brief exchange with Nara, she went to fetch Uzaya. Uzaya appeared at the foot of the stairwell moments later and did not come any farther. He stood where the light from the common room thinned, waiting. "Master Uzaya?" The acolyte bowed respectfully. Uzaya took in the young man's appearance. Immaculate, untouched by work or stain, the unmistakable look of a recent initiate. "The Verdant Council requests your presence. The Grand Hierophant wishes to honor your service in defending Hearth End Lodge and saving the lives of our faithful." "Honor?" "You destroyed undeath and preserved life. This is the sacred purpose of our order." The acolyte's voice carried rehearsed conviction. "The council convenes this afternoon at the second bell. They ask that you attend. The matter is considered urgent." The messenger's eyes settled on him. He hesitated. "For the record," he said, "from what line do you come?" "I'm half-drow," Uzaya replied. The acolyte nodded once. He scribbled something on his pad. The pause tightened, settling into something quieter. At last he spoke. "The church stands in the mid-district, near Guildstone Plaza. I can escort you if—" "I'll find it," Uzaya interrupted. The acolyte bowed slightly and departed, green robes swishing against the doorframe. Uzaya returned to his room. The church's reputation was clear enough. They fought undeath with religious fervor. If they wanted to honor him for doing the same, he wouldn't refuse. Beneath Hearth End Lodge, the cellar is quiet. Stone and mortar fill the breach in the wall, now packed tight. Beyond the seal, the crude passage remains, sloping downward through mud and earth. 20 feet, 40. Where soil meets black stone, the ancient structure's outer wall. An archway, stairs descending. Through the sanctum, ritual chambers, barracks where corpses stood waiting. Past choked stairwells and flooded passages. Past the obstructions. Deeper into the structure. The architecture begins to change. Elegance replaces haste. Details carved with inhuman precision. Angles sharpen. Corridor walls tilt inward, ending at a circular door shaped like an ornate shield. Veilguard letters are fused into the door's surface. Warnings in a dead language. 2 years earlier, 6 iron jacks stood in a circle, torchlight throwing their shadows long across ancient walls. Chalk lines crossed the floor in warding patterns, copied from a book they barely understood. Symbols misdrawn, angles wrong. Weeks of digging had brought them here. The chamber was older than anything above it. Black stone walls carved with geometric precision. Channels cut into the floor, converging on a central basin, worn smooth by use they could not imagine. "Ready?" one asked. The leader nodded and began. He spoke words of a dead language, gestures lifted from diagrams. They believed they were calling something useful. Wealth, protection, power they could carry out with them. The air thickened. Pressure gathered in the confined space, wrong and tightening. The chalk lines began to glow green. Fear crept in. The leader tried to stop. He couldn't. The words dragged themselves from his throat, syllables he had never learned, forcing their way out. The basin cracked. Stone split down the center. Not from impact, from beneath. Green light bled upward as the fissure widened. An invisible wave of something struck them all. Flesh drew tight over bone. Eyes sank. Leather collapsed around frames that had been men moments before. One tried to scream. His lungs were already dust. The leader lasted longest. Long enough to see the rift steady. Long enough to watch something take root. Then nothing. The spiral cyst began in this way. Present day. 2 years had thickened it. The cyst spread through stone, following channels carved millennia ago. What had once regulated balance now carried corruption. 6 bodies lay where they had fallen. Dried leather, hollow skulls. Fingers curled around tools dropped mid-use. Tonight, one moved. A skull turned. Vertebrae ground against stone. Green light filled empty sockets. Another corpse dragged itself upright, joints cracking as dead limbs remembered motion. They rose, slow, awkward, but rising. At the chamber's edge, a stairwell opened into one of many passages threaded through the ziggurat's lower levels, leading into the wilderness beyond. Soil and time had hidden the entrances. The dead were already moving through them. Chapter 17. The Celestial Heart. Uzaya left Hearthend Lodge just after noon. The messenger's words still echoed in his mind. The Grand Hierophant wishes to honor your service. But the young acolyte's eyes had lingered too long on his features, cataloging each detail as if preparing a report. Honor, or scrutiny disguised as gratitude. The morning's quiet had persisted, even through Hearth's End. People whispered about the incident, but when Uzaya passed, their eyes dropped. He had saved lives, but he had done so with an ease they did not understand. Uzaya pulled his cloak against the wind and kept walking. By the time he reached Guildstone Plaza, the cobblestones had warmed beneath his boots. He moved into the square as merchants called out from canvas-shaded carts, voices overlapping and falling away around him. Baskets of cabbages and onions sat open to the air, still dusted with soil. Nearby, crabs lay bound on chipped boards, beside fish wrapped in damp cloth. The sellers watching the crowd more than the goods. The stalls thinned toward the center of the plaza, giving way to fixed storefronts and stone facades. A bakery's door stood open, oven heat rolling out before dissipating into the street. Nearby, a jeweler's narrow frontage caught the light, iron bars shadowing thick glass. An apothecary's window hung heavy with braided herbs that brushed together softly when the breeze found them. Coins clinked, canvas snapped overhead, and a brief burst of laughter rose and faded as he moved on. At the plaza's center loomed the towering figure of the first Storm King, Faragoth. Formed from dark basalt with meteoric striations, it predated the city that had grown around it. The statue rose 200 feet into the air, one massive hand clenched and raised as if commanding the sky itself. During lightning storms, the statue drew the strikes, and for a breath, the veins lit from within, pale light racing through the stone before sinking back into shadow. Uzaya slipped through the crowd without drawing notice. The Church of the Celestial Heart rose from the rise above the plaza, the tallest structure in Eldenport. Spires of verdant marble reached skyward, every surface dressed and joined with deliberate precision. Soft green mineral veining ran through the stone in branching patterns, carefully oriented by the masons so the lines flowed upward along columns, arches, and spires, as if the church itself were growing rather than built. Dark ironwood was used sparingly, doors, ribs, and tracery, its deep grain providing contrast and restraint rather than weight. 2 ancient oaks flanked the entrance, their presence sanctified rather than accidental. The church had been built around them, foundation and steps accommodating their roots as living pillars honoring the faith they sheltered. Above the doors, the archway was a triumph of relief work, the celestial heart rendered in intricate detail, antlers branching into leaf and light, hooves lifting from mist-carved stone as it guided souls across the threshold. Stained glass windows rose high along the church's face, in tall, narrow panels. Sunburst motifs worked in gold, forest green, and deep amber. From the steps below, the scenes were unmistakable. Clerics confronting the undead with disciplined calm, others kneeling beside the wounded as controlled bands of green radiance passed between hands and flesh. At certain hours, that same hue threaded faintly through the stonework itself, answering prayer with a quiet, living glow. He climbed the steps, boots silent on worn stone, and approached the sacred threshold. The doors opened. Sanctified oil and crushed herbs scented the air within. Quiet voices murmured prayers in the main sanctuary beyond. An older cleric met him in the narthex almost immediately. Green robes, a silver belt cinched tight, his eyes clear despite his age. "You're Uzaya." Not a question, a statement. "I am," said Uzaya. The cleric's expression didn't change. He studied him for a long moment, then, "Wait here." He disappeared through a side door without another word. Uzaya stood alone between the doors and the sanctuary. Carved reliefs lined the walls, the celestial heart guiding souls through mist, clerics in battle against skeletal hordes, figures passing between the ethereal and the world-bound. Calming chants reverberated from the balconies above. Minutes passed. The incense smoke continued its slow drift. Frankincense. Voices rose through the closed door, muffled and indistinct. Not prayer, discussion. Finally, a different cleric emerged. He was older, mid-50s, with iron-gray hair and the distinctive golden sash of an elder. His expression was composed, professional. "Uzaya?" He didn't extend his hand. "I am Elder Rilan. The council has convened regarding your assistance at Hearth End Lodge." "The wounded are recovering?" Uzaya asked. "It's too early to tell." A pause. "The guard has taken a turn for the worse." Relin continued. "We invited you in good faith. That invitation cannot stand. You sought fellowship with the Arcanum, the institution responsible for the Ember Vault desecration." "Desecration?" Uzaya echoed. 9 of our faithful, entrusted to their care for study after death, were instead subjected to necromantic experimentation. The scandal further damaged the Arcanum's reputation and nearly forced our intervention. "But I was rejected by the Arcanum," Uzaya said. "Your intent was clear nonetheless." Relan folded his hands. "The celestial heart does not ally with those who pursue power through institutions that defile the sanctity of death." Uzaya studied him. "And if I'd never gone to the Arcanum?" His expression tightened. "The council's decision stands." The church doors closed behind him with the finality of a gavel. Outside, Uzaya paused on the steps between the giant oaks that flanked the entrance. The afternoon air was cool. Leaves rustled overhead, their shadows dancing across the worn stone. He closed his eyes. 2 rejections now. The Arcanum, the celestial heart. Neither wanted him. Uzaya exhaled slowly and continued down the steps. The afternoon sun sank lower through coastal fog as Uzaya studied the city from the church hill. Eldenport fell away in uneven tiers, ordered stone giving way to tighter streets and weathered timber as the ground dropped toward the basin. Farther down, mist softened docks and half-flooded streets into a false calm that only held at a distance, the drowned quarter almost peaceful from above. Across the bay's curve, the northern ridge rose again, wooded slopes climbing toward Hearth End, where lamplight already flickered in upper windows. He started down. The mid-district smelled of bread and worked leather, chimney smoke, and horses. Blackstone showed through some of the buildings here. A bakery's rear wall was half old black and half mortared brick. The older material looked pristine and faintly glossy. The architecture shifted as he descended, timber replacing stone, shingles darkened by salt air and age. Ivy climbed walls where repairs had stalled. Salt air mixed with wood smoke as he entered the transition streets. Gulls circled overhead, their calls carrying over laundry lines strung between windows and doors left open to catch the light. Rickety stairs skirting steep drops doubled back on themselves toward the cove, replacing sloping paths where the quarter's elevation fell away. Buildings clung at odd angles. Terraced gardens held late turnips, winter squash, and herbs in clay pots. He skirted the quarter's northern edge, where the road began to climb again. Wooden buildings gave way to forest, pine and oak reclaiming the slope. Old growth followed, trunks thick as barrels, needles carpeting the trail. The air cooled beneath the canopy. An owl trilled. It was nearly dusk. Hearth End Lodge emerged through the trees. 3 stories of weathered clapboard, the color of driftwood, its cedar shake roof dark with moss on the north face. A painted wooden sign hung from iron chains above the porch. Hearth End in faded letters, the wood grain showing through where salt air had stripped the paint. The sign rocked slightly in the evening breeze. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, carrying the smell of burning oak. Amber light glowed in the windows. A wide porch wrapped the front of the building, railings carved from salvaged ship timber. Lanterns hung from hooks, not yet lit in the fading daylight. Uzaya climbed the porch steps, the old boards answering his boots, and went inside. That night, alone in his room, Uzaya lay awake longer than he meant to. The pendant was beating in time with his heartbeat. He sat up, hand pressed to his chest where it rested, warmth seeping through the fabric, its vibration faint but steady. A sound slipped out of his throat before he realized he was making it. Deep, held for a breath too long. The pendant answered. Its vibration shifted, matching the pitch, warmth intensifying as the two fell briefly into tune. Uzaya startled and cut the sound short. Silence rushed back into the room, the pressure settling where it belonged. He drew a careful breath and let his hand fall away from his chest. Sleep would be a long time coming. Chapter 18. The Falling Away. Uzaya woke to gray light filtering through the shutters. He lay still in the moment, staring at the ceiling beams. The visions had brought him here, to Eldenport. But why? The Arcanum had rejected him. So had the Church. He had saved lives at Hearth End. They were grateful enough to keep their distance. Uzaya sat up slowly, his hand lifted toward his chest instinctively, then stopped short. Maybe the visions were wrong. The thought did not argue. It simply remained. He swung his legs off the bed and started packing. Nara was wiping down tables when he came downstairs, his pack slung over one shoulder. She saw it at once and set the rag aside. "Leaving?" "Yes." She studied him for a moment, then said, "You earned the room." Uzaya paused. "I appreciate it." "It's yours, anytime you need it." Uzaya inclined his head and stepped through the doorway. He didn't look back. The hike took some time. He moved away from Hearthend through the trees, the lodge disappearing behind him as the forest thickened along the slope. The trail narrowed, then widened into a worn road that descended toward the water. The drowned quarter spread below him, larger than he had thought from above. Not just docks and flooded streets, but whole blocks pressed into the basin, rooftops crowding together where the city had given up climbing. He kept walking. The afternoon unfolded around him as he explored, taking his time. Narrow lanes wound between buildings that leaned on each other for support. Water seeped up through old foundations and broken stone, pooling in low places before draining toward the bay through channels worn smooth by decades of tide. Laundry hung from the upper windows. Voices drifted from open doorways, arguments, laughter, the mundane sounds of people living here. Mist gathered in the low places as evening settled. It pooled along the streets, lingering around him as he moved through. He passed a woman hauling a basket of eels. A child sat on a wooden crate near the docks, carving something from driftwood. Two men argued beneath a canvas awning, the price of a fishing lure carrying clearly through the quiet. No one stared. No one whispered. Down here, pale skin and silver hair were just another misfit. By the time Uzaya reached the waterfront, the sun was sinking beneath the horizon. Amber and gold tinged the sky, the light slanting low across the bay. He found a narrow dock that jutted out into open water and walked to its end. The planks creaked beneath him. Mist gathered around the pilings and at his feet, rising from the water. He sat, legs dangling over the edge, and drew out his pipe, darkened with use and warm from his pocket. He pinched pipe leaf from his pouch and packed the bowl by feel, pressing it down with his thumb. He struck the flint once. Sparks died against the bowl. He struck it again, shielding the flame with his hand until it caught. He drew once, held the smoke, and let it out slowly. Uzaya stared across the water. His shoulders eased without him noticing at first. Liesenhold took shape through the fog against the horizon. Its tower leaned at a dangerous angle, as if it should have fallen long ago. The rest of the structure spread beside it, low and uneven, walls still standing where higher works had been lost. In the dim light, it was hard to tell where the ruin ended and the bay began. He drew again. The pull was smoother this time. The dock creaked as boats strained against their ropes. A hatch opened on one of the fishing boats behind him. A man climbed out, steady, unhurried. He moved like someone used to narrow footing and low ceilings. His beard was thick and gray. His hands were rough, the skin thickened and marked, still carrying the smell of fish and wet rope. He glanced in Uzaya's direction. "You looking for something?" he asked. "Somewhere to sleep," Uzaya said. "Rusty Anchor, 2 blocks up, if you're not picky." He gestured toward the road, then went back below without waiting for an answer. Street lamps guttered outside the Rusty Anchor, their flames struggling against the damp. A warped sign hung over the entrance, an anchor carved into weathered wood. The building was broad and heavy, its timbers dark with age and salt. It rose above the surrounding roofs, Thick iron braces had been bolted across its walls, strapped on like crude surgery. Greasy amber light leaked from the windows on both levels, shadows shifting behind the glass. He heard the low rise and fall of voices, the muffled press of a crowded room. Uzaya opened the door. Sawdust coated the floor, softening old stains. A low haze clung to the room. Smoke drifted from torch to table to rafter, as though the saloon had been exhaling it for decades. The room noticed. It quieted almost at once. Conversations died table by table. Faces turned toward him, scarred, hollow-eyed, grime-streaked, calculating. A few women lingered in booths along the walls, seated on the laps of men with coin to spare, their attention practiced and unhurried. Uzaya approached the bar. The bartender, broad-shouldered and hard-faced, glanced disapprovingly at his chalky skin and silver hair, then went back to polishing a mug. "A room and a drink," Uzaya said. "Inn's full," he said at once. Uzaya took in the empty tables, the open stairwell, fresh mugs being poured for regulars. "Just the drink, then." The bartender filled a dirty mug and slid it over to him, without eye contact. The ale was bitter, unmistakably the worst on tap. Uzaya drank it down. Another. "We're closing." Behind him, someone ordered a round. Someone else laughed too loudly. Uzaya caught the bartender's eyes and held them. Intense, crystalline green in a face pale as chalk. The man behind the counter turned away, aligning glasses that had never been out of place. He was aware of the three men watching him from the corner, blades at their belts, eyes already narrowing with intent. One muttered something, another nodded. They stood and slipped out through the side door. Uzaya pushed his drink toward the bartender, left the exact coin on the counter, and stepped out into the misty street. The din rose again behind him. The tension he'd been carrying slackened. He looked up the street. Empty. Let them come. The street continued higher before it bent into a dark lane where the lamplight didn't reach. Water ran downwards along the curb, pooled in uneven places along the edges. The mist had returned in full, softening the streets, hanging low. Swallowing sound. As Uzaya walked, 5 men appeared, stepping from the shadows, spread out to block him. Short blades. A club. Wrapped to keep it quiet. Faces already sure of the ending. The tallest of them stepped forward. A jagged scar cut down his jaw. "You lost?" he asked. Uzaya stopped. "No," he said, "but you're in my way." The man smirked, confidence worn too easily. He didn't budge. "You should leave," Uzaya said. They didn't. A low, gravelly sound rose from Uzaya's throat, formed by intent rather than thought. The sound came out of him in a way no voice should. It was wrong in tone and shape, heavy enough to make the men nearest him recoil. The one at his left clutched his head and folded, dropping hard to a knee. Another staggered backward into the alley wall, breath tearing out of him in a broken shout. The man with the scar froze where he stood. His smirk vanished. His weapon slipped from his hand and struck the ground with a sharp clatter. He lasted a moment longer, then screamed, knees giving way, and he went down hard. A horrible expression of terror frozen on his face. The others broke and ran, stumbling off in different directions without looking back. One remained, disoriented. He stood, shaking his head, hands quivering, eyes focusing back on Uzaya. "Go," Uzaya said. "Tell them what you saw." The man ran. Uzaya dragged the fallen body into the alley, hid it behind refuse, and was already gone. The street climbed as he entered what locals called the high end, where homes clung above the docks and the air smelled less of rot. Voices drifted behind shuttered windows as he passed. The street narrowed as it rose, winding and vanishing into fog ahead. After a time, a two-story cottage came into view. It sat low and solid at a corner, stone and mortar fitted tight against the weather. Its windows were divided into small wooden panes, light glowing within. A narrow sign wobbled above the door in the wind. Abe's Curiosities. A smaller placard hung in the window beneath it. One bed available. Uzaya approached the front door and knocked. A half-elf answered the door. Uzaya stopped. He'd heard of them. Remnants of the old blood from when elves still walked the surface. Before the Sundering, before the Storm Kings drove them into hiding. He'd never met one. The man looked older than he had expected for an elf. Lean and weathered, hair tousled and pulled back. The pointed ears were there, if you looked. Subtle, but unmistakable. "I'm Abe," he said. Uzaya took inventory. Abe wore a long coat of heavy, oil-darkened canvas, patches overlapping, leather reinforcing the shoulders, elbows, and cuffs, where fabric failed first. Pockets crowded the outside. The inside held more. When he moved, tools shifted softly, settling back into familiar places. A band circled his head, fitted with a hinged magnifying rig he could drop into place by habit, lenses clicking forward depending on what he needed to see. His fingers were permanently stained, grease under the nails, fine grit worked into the creases, the hands of someone who used them often. His amber eyes took in Uzaya's pack, his stance, the way he held himself, then settled on his face. He shifted aside, opening the doorway a little wider. "You need a room?" Uzaya glanced past him into the lamp-lit interior. "I do." "5 gold, Abe said, holding Uzaya's gaze. The price was high. "Fine," Uzaya said, not breaking eye contact. Abe opened the door the rest of the way, and Uzaya stepped inside. The front room was narrow but deep, the air warm and faintly metallic beneath the smell of old wood and cooking grease. A table sat near the center, with mismatched chairs pulled close, pushed back just far enough to keep the walkway clear. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with objects that looked less like wares and more like tools paused mid-task. Coiled rope hung from pegs near the door. Lanterns of different makes rested on hooks, some glass-clouded, some pristine. Along one wall, iron hardware had been arranged by habit rather than symmetry, close at hand for anyone who knew what they were looking for. Climbing hooks stood out among them. Simple things, old designs. 4-pronged iron heads, narrow and blunt at the tips, meant to catch stone seams easily. Several hung already rigged with line, knots set, others bare, stacked together as if there were more of them than anyone would ever need. Abe noticed Uzaya examining them. He reached up, took one down, and turned it once in his hand. "You like these?" he said, setting one into Uzaya's palm. "Take it. I've got plenty. Can't seem to get rid of them." He took another from the bin and hung it back in place without looking. "Your room is upstairs," he said. "First door on the right." Uzaya went up. The room was small. A cot, a table, a shuttered window. Clean. Quiet. He sat, let the exhaustion begin to settle. When he lay down, sleep came quickly. Dawn kissed hearth end with pale gray bands, cold light that softened nothing. Nara moved through the common room by habit, hands busy as she set the place in order. She reached for 2 mugs, stopped.
Put one back.
She climbed the stairs. His door opened without resistance. The bed was neatly made, room clean. She stood there a long moment, her palm resting on the doorknob. Then she closed the door quietly behind her.